be accountable. He says, look, I've been with you for 20 years. You know me. The sheep and goats have not miscarried, and nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I haven't taken from you. You know that. I didn't bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. You demanded payment from me from anything that was stolen. I paid for that which was stolen. It wasn't even my fault, but I paid for it. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, the cold at night. Sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years. I worked 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flocks. You changed my wages 10 times. You lowered my pay 10 times, Laban. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban, you know what's going on here. You see the situation. And he's basically being accountable to Laban. He said, Laban, you know what I've been like. You know what I'm like. You know how I've acted. You know how I've worked for you. Which brings us to the third point. And he's basically confronting Laban. But you need to understand, and here's the third thing here, except that not everyone will agree. Except that not everyone is going to agree with you. When change happens and there are conflicts and there are problems, particularly in a group, not everybody's going to agree. You know what's going to happen in our church? We're going to have some people that come in view of a call for pastor, and we'll get a point and we'll vote for them, and not everybody's going to agree. Okay, that doesn't mean that somebody's wrong. It just means that somebody has observed something or seen something or has a different interpretation or a different perspective of something. They see things a little differently. Okay, it's all based on their experience and based on their sensitivities and that sort of thing. Okay, we need to listen to that, but we need to be sure that we have God's mind and God's will on this thing. We need to realize that not everybody is going to agree, especially in a Baptist church. And so it's important, you know, in a group this size, and this is a large class by class standards. In a class this size, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but do you realize that we have Republicans and Democrats in this class? I think we should get into a political debate. What do you think? And by the way, I agree with both of you, and I disagree with both of you. I just want you to know. I'm neither, and I'm proud of it. You know? And so don't ever pin me in a hole and say, oh, he's a Republican or he's a Democrat, because you'd be wrong. I'm very proud of the fact that I'm not. What did that have to do with anything that I was talking about? Oh, we disagree. We get into things that, you know, the fact is that not everybody's going to agree on everything, and we just need to get to that point where we realize that. And look how Laban says this. Look at Laban's perspective. The women are my daughters. The children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have born? Laban didn't quite see it the way Jacob saw it. He forgot that he had made these deals with Jacob. He didn't see it that way. Laban refused to acknowledge what he had agreed to previously. Listen, here's the fact, though, that we need to understand. People can still be wrong and get along. People can still be wrong and get along. People can still disagree and get along. You people who are wrong can still get along with me. People can be wrong and still get along. Which brings us to the fourth point: acknowledge that it's not about you. This is so important. When change happens, it's not about you. You know, we get so bent out of shape about change coming in our life because it's about us. How's it going to affect me? Oh, no, woe is me. It's not about you. Change isn't about you. There's such an important part about change that we miss here, and that is that the right kind of change is something that God does. Something that God is motivating. Something that God is causing. It's not about you. Romans 14 verses 7 through 8 says, for none of us lives to himself alone. None of us dies to himself alone. If we live to the Lord. And if we die, we die to the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. It's not about you. Change is bigger than you. Change means that God is up to something. And that you're just getting in on it. And your primary focus is to be on the lordship, the leadership of Christ in your life. And when you understand that it's not about you, that it's about what God is up to, that brings two things into your life. It brings peace and it brings worship. It brings real peace and it brings real worship into your life. And that's what happens the next few verses. I'm just going to skip over that because of time. But they set up these two stones. They had actually a pile of stones. And Laban had one and Jacob had one. And they had this meeting of the minds, this worship time together. And so they set it up and they called it each by their own name. And both names, both what Laban called it, what Jacob called it, meant a pile of stones that is a witness. Means the same thing. There's no hidden meaning in those words. But it was also called Mizpah. They also refer to it as Mizpah, which means a watchtower. And Laban referred to it that way to remind Jacob that God was watching him. And really what he was also saying was, I realize God's watching me too. God is watching, and he needed to live his life accordingly. But the pile of stones represents one other thing that I want to close with, and that is that when change happens, you need to define your boundaries. Define your boundaries. Laban also said to Jacob, here's this heap and here's this pillar. It's in verses 51 through 54. I've set these up between you and me. This heap is a witness and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. So you need, this is really important as part of change, and don't miss out on this very significant part, and that is that you need to set boundaries in your life. When change happens, these are the boundaries. And the first boundary that you set is, this is where I will not go back to. Jacob was saying, I'm not going back past this boundary. I won't go back. I've made up my mind, I'm going forward. Decide when change happens that you're not going back to certain things in your life. There are certain things that you just will not do again. I'm not going back to that. I'm not going back to that point of my life. Notice that change should not involve harming other people. That's very important too. Laban says, this boundary says that I will not harm you and you will not harm me. Even if people disagree, they should agree that they will not seek to harm each other. Romans 12, verses 16 through 21 says, live in harmony with one another. Don't be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Don't be conceited. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. For it's written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Set the boundaries of what you will not go back to. Now, it's important to understand that change does not ignore or deny the past. It doesn't say that, oh, I'll just pretend it never happened. It doesn't ignore it. It doesn't change it. But here's the important thing to understand about change. Change embraces the future. Change says, I'm not going back to the past, but I am going to embrace the future. And this is the only place that we get an inkling that Jacob's father, Isaac, was still alive. He refers to the fear of Isaac. And when he was saying the fear, what he was talking about was that Jacob still had to live his life seeking to please God. Abraham already had the blessing because he was already in the presence of God, but Isaac still had to live his life with the idea that he had to face God. So in effect what Jacob was saying was, look, I'm facing my past. He knew that he was going to go back to that land where he had deceived his father and he had deceived his brother. He was going back to face that, but he was embracing the future. He knew change had happened, and God had told him to do this. And even though it must have been a little scary knowing that he was going to face his father and face his brother, he was going to do what God told him to do. Now next Sunday, we're going to see what Jacob does when he realizes he is going to face his brother and he thinks his brother's going to kill him. What to do in the crisis. What to do. How to handle the crisis in your life. That'll be our study for next Sunday. But I want you to remember one more thing about the altar. And that is, an altar says, this is where I was when I met God and moved on. What Jacob was saying was, I met God here. God brought me this far. Now I'm moving on. I'm not going past it. I'm moving on. I'm moving forward. I'm moving to where God wants me. You are not to stay at an altar. An altar is a place of new beginnings. It is a place of change. An altar always, look in the Bible, every time you study about an altar, it always represented change. An altar always represented change, and it always represented coming to God for the change. Coming to God for change.
And it's only through your word